Well, what is it that makes the South spicy? Is it the food? Is it the nightlife or the brilliance of the man that is the pride of Louisiana? When he's not rocking in the courtroom and running his own law firm and visiting churches all over the world, he's a staple on court TV, as well as a number of other news outlets. He's killing it on his podcast and on social media and on Talk 107.3 with Brian Haldane. He is the incredible Franz Borghardt. And making his great return, as well as joining our gang for the first time, you know him as the brilliant author of great books such as Defend Your Greatness, Finding Your 2.0, and Fighting for Yourself. He's all over us in the morning with Julie Grant and at night with Vinnie Politan, a court TV staple, as well as a bunch of other media. Ew, come on, Derek. A bunch of other media outlets. Inspirational, vegan, and one heck of an amazing guy, the incredible Kirk Nurmi. And rounding out our team for this episode, she is at the pinnacle of everything pop culture, whilst also brilliantly digging deep in everything true crime between the Outlier podcast, Corruption, Primetime Crime Live, and PopCrime.tv. She still finds time to share news and insights all over the media, including with Nancy Grace. She shines a light where few others can. She is the incredible Lauren Conlin. How is everyone doing today?
Doing awesome, though. I got to correct the record in case Franz ever gets me on the stand. I'm a vegetarian, not a vegan. So I don't want that to come up on the record and Franz to be able to have that fuel.
What's the difference?
The difference is a vegetarian will eat dairy, so cheese, yogurt, that sort of thing, milk, what have you. A vegan eats no animal byproducts, so no dairy. A vegan wouldn't even eat honey, for example.
So the difference is the odds of Kurt finding a vegetarian gas station like eatery kind of thing going on is highly more likely than a vegan gas station morsel.
See, yeah, but when we're talking gas stations, you probably begin and end your search at a banana, hoping they have a banana.
Apple,
somewhere.
Banana.
Yeah.
See,
that's where it begins and ends.
We talk about this all the time, and people have chimed in on Twitter and stuff like that. It's like, you got to remember, okay, Kirk looks fantastic now. The hair, everything.
He's a fine specimen of a man.
He is. He's a handsome
objectively.
Guy. Oh my goodness, I'm coming back to this show.
However, but you had to get back to healthy from where you were at, I want to say 10 to 15 years ago. So the curiosity that we've had was, outside of that hellish case that you had to work, that's why I didn't mention that book. We'll mention it at the end if we have some time. But was that like eating bad food and kind of dealing with that, with depression and the insanity that you were going through? Did they kind of go hand in hand, or was it just something else?
I think so. I mean, Franz knows this too. There's a lot of lawyers that drink a lot or are using illicit substances or things like that to cope with the stress of lawyering. So the alternative to me, now I've had some weight issues in law school, lost some weight back and forth, but I think to me it would seem like a cleaner alternative. So food became the refuge, if you will. I mean, we all got trained on that to some extent, right? Your kids do good in school, they get a good report card, you go out for ice cream, something like that. And then so it becomes that kind of eating unhealthy. You can't out exercise a bad diet. I mean, I played tennis 3-4 times a week back then when you saw me during the Arias trial. But another big deal is happiness, right? I mean, the other thing Franz could speak to is the fact that the reason these lawyers are drinking or overeating or whatever they're indulging in is because they're not really that happy. So happiness became a big quotient for me, and that's when when I went through cancer, and I had a good long talk about this whole issue with Lauren a while back, is that once issues came up for me, once cancer came up for me, it was like, am I going to fight to live my remaining years the way I had my prior? And the answer was no. And so instead of taking a suspension from the bar, I gave him the middle finger and I walked away, and I haven't looked back because I've been happy ever since.
One of the things I love about Kirk when you see him out and around, he has zero chip on his shoulder, because when him and I first got, sort of together, following each other and all that, I would say something or ask a question, like I do on Twitter or on Facebook or whatever. And, great answer, this, that, factual and everything. And then you get a few people that would throw in, oh, how can you ask him, blah, blah, blah. And then I'd shoot him a message on the side, and I'd shoot the person, be like, "You don't like what the fuck, blah 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 blah." And Kirk's like, "Oh yeah, and it's no big deal. I just block. Doesn't bother me. I just block him. I just block him." And I'm like, "It bothers me, and I have nothing to do with it." But
Mhm.
I don't know, man.
Get it.
You've managed. The last time Kirk and I talked, you said, it was the whole um road less chosen to happiness sort of thing, and it seems like you're there, man. Especially we were just saying now when you can wear a bathing suit bottoms with a suit jacket.
That's right. Well,
So
listen though, it is about being happy, and going back to 2013, back when I was trying the Arias case. I mean, I was getting death threats via email. I mean, Maricopa County, we had to put our email address on the motion so people could threaten me through email. They could call my office, say what a horrible person I was. We had bomb threats in the courthouse, things like that. And of course, I didn't have Twitter at the time, but certainly I knew that people were attacking me on Twitter, etc. So, it just becomes I realize the old saying is true, hurt people. And I realize that there are a lot of people out there that are hurting and trying to reach out to hurt people. So I don't take it any personally. I love the Wayne Dyer teaching that other people's opinion of me is none of my business. And that's the way I function, because whether it's good or bad, I don't have to digest that and live off that external validation.
I also have felt like people don't quite understand your job as an attorney, or any attorney's job sometimes, because like we always talk about this. They're like, how could you defend her? And you're like, honey, somebody's got to do it. Everybody, deserves, as horrible as they may seem, they deserve their constitutional rights. And plus, they didn't even know half of your story. You were like, I don't want to be here either. I've tried not to be here. Like, my God. I mean, like, yeah, go ahead.
All right, from one of Kirk's books, that was, again, I would talk to anybody who just wants to jump down his throat to be the defense attorney, or any defense attorney.
Mm-hmm.
Particular one, Kirk's right. He said, "I don't want this. This is not."
Didn't want it.
And they said, tough shit. This is the way it goes.
so it's funny. I did a 3-year stretch as a public defender where I didn't get to choose who my clients were, right? I represented a serial killer. I represented all sorts of great, wonderful people. I did a little bit of death penalty work. Although if you're not doing full-time death penalty work and you're like doing contract death penalty work, it is a practice slayer, and it's hard to juggle death penalty and private practice. I will tell you that those were the easier people to respond to when I was representing someone who would be considered a monster or horrible. And I'm like, look, I'm just a court-appointed attorney. This is a part of the Constitution. I don't pick my clients.
Yeah.
It became more problematic for me when I started taking money to defend people. And it was like, yeah, this person's allegedly horrible, and I took a whole bunch of money. How do I sleep at night? I sleep just fine.
$4,000 mattress.
Yeah.
Silk Egyptian cotton. But the funny thing is, and Kirk, I will say this, I said this about 2 episodes ago, me getting blowback for defending people is a more recent thing for me in the last year or so, where I would try cases, and if I win the case, it's like really creepy, like, how did you, blah, 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 and like threat kind of stuff. But before that, like 10, 15 years ago, nobody cared. Like nobody, like, no, I never represented who you represented, but like, it seems like it's a more modern, like, addition when you look at like X and you look at social media. All of a sudden people are like, they're forgetting all these constitutional obligations that we have, that where, by the way, this really bad person you want to put in a human cage for the rest of their life, you can't put them in a human cage unless they get a defense. It doesn't work.
You know what?
It's
When Kirk said, like, we'll say that he was the first attorney to get death threats on social media or via email, I was going to say, Lauren, and again, Franz, you have a good point. This seems to be happening a little bit more and more. Why do you think people care? Do you think it's a Boston thing that caused the Reed outbreak, or do you just think it's people just want to go
Oh
out there
God.
and raise hell?
I mean, that's a completely different beast. I think, lately crime has gotten super political, where everybody picks their side. And if you don't agree that this person's guilty or that person, it's a whole thing. But Karen Reed, God, that's something I've never, ever seen before. I mean, like, in my life, right?
dude.
Yeah.
today or yesterday, I am not a big fan of Turtle Boy.
Okay.
I have publicly said not a big fan.
Okay.
I posted on Twitter yesterday about, hey, I'm going to use his case as a hypo in my law class because I think there's issues with the criminal case. Regardless of how I feel
with
about
the
him,
witness intimidation case, you mean?
Oh my
gosh.
Yeah,
no, totally. Whether you like him or not, this is a weird case.
like,
Absolutely.
from a seat of complete neutrality, I've got 44 students. I'm gonna let them figure it out.
Yeah.
People lost their freaking minds.
What do you
Like,
mean?
they lost their minds, dude. The trolling has been real, and like the irony is someone that he even asked me, Turtle Boy even asked me, he was like, "So what do you think, Professor?" And I'm like, I think there's issues with this case. I think there's constitutional issues. I think there's issues with regard to this, and this. And I said, and I even said, as a former prosecutor, I don't really like Commonwealth being the ones. I think there should be a special prosecutor. Didn't know that there was already a special prosecutor.
Okay.
Derek, people don't even realize sometimes they're not reading what's being on social media. They're just jumping to conclusions. Yeah, exactly. And if it doesn't fit their immediate narrative, it's like, but I will say, there's something very satisfying just hitting block. It's just, it's like I don't lose any.
I never did that. I never wanted to do that, I guess. And I hate the word grifter now because of the Karen Reed case, because the minute you say something that someone doesn't agree with, you're a grifter. And I'm like, do you guys even know what that means? That I don't think you understand. Like, me saying my opinion is not like feeding my family. I'm so confused about that. And it's just, I don't know if you saw my coverage. I thought I was at first neutral, and then I went out and I said my opinion, which was, I don't see the proof where she hit him, but I also like the conspiracy is pretty tough to believe also. I had this guy, like this weirdo, he found pictures of me on the internet, and like, look, Kirk, I know you have pictures of yourself where you're like a lot heavier, but I went through something where I had to take prednisone, a steroid. And so there are pictures of me on the internet where I am like 10 pounds heavier. My face looks fuller. My business, whatever, that's my business. This guy was literally taking pictures, zooming in on my fuller face, and then taking pictures of me now being like, like, this bitch is catfishing us, all this stuff, this grift. And I'm like, this is mental. And I have to say, like, I try to let it slide off, but yeah, it kind of gets to you a little bit. You're like, it's just jarring because you're minding your business. I'm wrangling my kids. I'm just trying to like make my life work here. I didn't think I was bothering anyone. And then all of a sudden this guy comes out and I'm just like, you are, and I'm sure he's some like, loser in the basement. God, I just
some troll somewhere.
Two things, Lauren, because I always, when I do these little posts, I cut and paste pictures. The first like 40 Google images of you that come up, you look great.
Well, thanks. So if that's the case, then this guy had to dig deep, which is even sicker. Like, that's creepy. Sick. Oh, that's like weird. I mean,
the first one that comes up is Kirk's Jack Duck picture with his Love Heels shirt on, which I love. All of Franz's pictures, he's heavy and he has glasses. And I'm like, I've seen this guy like you have to talk to the internet. You gotta get him to tighten up the game a bit.
Yeah, circling back.
Oh,
go ahead.
I was going to follow up on what Franz said, because I realized that, when I was going through it, that this idea of these televised trials, they become, as I've said before, reality TV shows to some people. And we're talking about, when we talk about Arias, and, Lauren mentioned she hadn't seen anything like Reed before. I would argue, I mean, at least at the time, Arias was one of the top 3 trials of court TV, and Headline News was running it 24/7, literally all across the world. And it's still with people. I get messages. I got a message from a lady a couple months ago. I'm from Tasmania. I hated you during the trial. I like you now. I mean, and so, this worldwide coverage and this idea that the social media gives us a forum to attack without really any retribution, right? I mean, what Lauren is talking about happened a million times over to me during the trial. Finding out where my co-counsel's kids went to grade school, things of that nature. My wife quitting her job because we have a unique last name and her name was on a school website, and it became a safety issue, right? So things of that nature, when we talk about these high profile trials that people get so invested in, right? I mean, like I say, I get questions from people all the time now. They want to ask me about Jodi Arias. Like Scott Peterson, 20 years later, there's a documentary coming out. So, or is out now. But I mean, so this is a real problem when we talk about cameras in the courtroom. It's when does it go too far, when it's putting justice at risk and it's putting the attorneys or the prosecutor. I mean, I was at the first crime con. Ken Peasley from Making of a Murderer was there. They had to have metal detectors because he'd received death threats because of the documentary. So yeah, it is a serious issue.
So I don't take myself that seriously. And if I see a social media post about a bad argument I made, I'm probably the first to say, yeah, that was a pretty shitty argument. However, there is also, Derek, a level of petty, like you're in a 3-week long trial. At some point, I'm going to wear the same suit again. Yeah. Right. So the tweet that says, oh, he's wearing that navy blue suit again. And I'm like, yep, you got me. I'm guilty. I'm wearing my navy blue suit again. And that was what's wonderful and scary, like with Karen Reed, was I love the fact that there's people like paying attention to what she's wearing in court every day. I think that's fun, right? Mm-hmm. And I think it's fun to talk about, like, okay, those colors, this scheme work, what does a jury do with all that? But then there's a level of like really creepy, like if you post something about my kid, yeah, no, I'm not.
Yeah, no. And what I meant, Kirk, is more like, I've never seen anything on social media, I guess, like the attacking towards one another. And Franz, I know that you know some of this too. There's a creator, somebody was pulling up her past and posting like just weird, creepy stuff that you're like, this is, and it sounds messed up because, like, yes, it is informative and interesting at times to follow these trials, but at the end of the day, like, somebody is dead and somebody died in a horrible way. So it is kind of strange, right, for you to think about what we're all kind of getting worked up over, and what, in the meantime, you've got a family that lost somebody, and then you kind of feel like shit. You're like, okay, wait a minute, I shouldn't be upset about somebody posting a fat picture of me. I'll be okay. I'm alive. My kids are alive, but I have to bring myself to that level sometimes, I guess, or else, but I have a question. Franz, I know Kirk does not drink. Do you drink alcohol or no?
So I'm an alcoholic. Hi, okay. Franz, alcoholic, been sober for 4 years. And I was circling back to what Kirk was talking about.
Oh.
The profession
Congrats.
Does not lend itself to healthy decision-making, right? So as a defense attorney in the beginning, if I would win, I never really won, right? If I lost, which I was supposed to do. From a dietary standpoint, if you're a trial attorney and you're in trial for 2 weeks, what are you eating? Like, when I got home, I wasn't trying to cook. It was like granola bars, or I'm eating like fast food or whatever.
Yeah.
And I don't sleep well. Now, what I will say is, if I would have continued on the collision course I was on, I probably would have lost my license at some point. Wow. But there's also an added problem, Lauren, of, to some degree, there is this culture of you work hard, you play hard as an attorney, and that's what we do, right? We're going to trial all day, and then I'm going to go get drinks with the prosecutors afterward. In my place, Kirk, we hang out with the prosecutors sometimes.
Wow.
And we would power drink. As a prosecutor, I would power drink with defense attorneys, and it was like rinse and repeat. I can't do that. Now and be effective.
What was your breaking point? I'm sorry to interrupt you. I'm just curious. Like, for you to say, okay, I need to get sober.
So for me, it was marital issues. So I got sober to try to save a marriage. And then this is the beauty of sobriety. The more sober you get, the more you start unpacking, like, oh man, my life really was unmanageable. Like, I thought I was this great attorney and I had all these wins and this, that, and the other. And you're like, no, my customer service was shitty and this, that, and the other. I will say this. There is a reason that this profession, lawyers, has like one of the highest substance abuse like issues out of all the professions, and most state bars are very sensitive to that. Most state bars, like losing your license over drinking or drugs, generally you have to basically tell the bar, hey, fuck you, I'm not going to get sober. I don't want to play this game. They'll give you chances. Now, generally, the way you lose your license in our profession is stealing money that's not yours, killing people, stealing money that's not yours, killing people, or diddling.
Murder. They don't like murder.
They don't like murder, and then diddling clients. Those are like the big
When you
ones.
say diddling, you mean sleeping with clients, like
yes,
okay,
yes,
What?
yeah. Unless you have a
assault of
pre-existing
some
sexual
sort.
relationship with them, and then they kind of turn a blind eye.
The last
Okay.
the last recording we were going to do with Kirk and Franz, and Josh was here, but then Franz had to go away, was they were talking about in the defense business, there is a ton of, when you're working with people that are charged with prostitution and other sex related crimes, where either the people don't have the money or they just come back to you afterwards and say, you know, can I work
Casey Moreland. You guys know the Nashville judge, Casey Moreland, went to jail for that for a long time. You heard about that? I'm sure it was a few years ago. No, he was letting all the prostitutes off because he was sleeping with them, and then one of them wound up suicided, basically. So look up that case. That's a crazy one.
Will do.
Yeah. Sorry, I just had one more question for Franz, just about. So I know, sorry, but my brother is sober. He had a moment where he had to, just get to this place, but you didn't. I didn't really get your answer. You didn't have a clear defining moment where.
I did. I had a clear
you don't have to
defining
share
moment.
it. Sorry.
No. Okay. I will say part of it was pandemic, part of it was marital issues, and marital issues because of a lifestyle that was completely excessive and out of control.
Okay.
I will say that most of us that have issues in this profession, the moment generally comes from the state bar saying, hey, you need to stop.
Oh, so
or you get a DWI or multiple DWIs. Fortunately, I will tell you the miracle of my life, Lauren, I never killed anybody. That is, knock on wood, I never killed anybody as a result of driving drunk, but I mean, there by the grace go I.
Okay.
Unfortunately, we also have a lot of high functioning people with issues that think that everything's fine, and then they crash really hard, right? And it's, but I'll say this. Part of the beauty of recovery and being a little bit more spiritual than I used to be is I think it makes me a better attorney. I'm more empathetic. I'm more observant. I mean, I used to be the guy that had a problem with drinking and it would look at people and say, why won't you just stop using drugs? Why won't you just stop? Well, I mean, now I have a better understanding of why one who's addicted to something might not stop. It's made me a better advocate in those cases with judges. So,
right.
Yeah, but I'll say it again. I'm not Kurt. Kurt is a fine specimen of a human being. I mean, just, I don't take myself seriously. So I don't take myself seriously at all. So and Derek, you've heard this before. If someone tweets like, hey, can this Franz guy be any more of a moron? I'm tweeting back, I assure you, I absolutely can be more of a moron.
You should have known me when I used to drink.
No, I mean, I can make bad decisions,
Wait, that is really funny. And I just, I thought of this. I don't think any of you guys were at CrimeCon this year, but something that I noticed that I kind of started asking people is like, do you drink? Do you want to get a drink? Like, because it's not a lot of people drink. And I mean, there's a handful, right? But a lot of attorneys that were there and a lot of law enforcement that I was hanging out with, nobody drinks anymore. And so I was just like, oh God, I'm like, mom away from my kids. I want to get wild. And then I'm like, wait, I guess I don't really, because I don't want to be.
So the other fun thing is,
I just wanted to throw something in quick. The funny part about that was, Lauren, when you, me, and Franz and Josh talked last time, it was the Monday after CrimeCon, and you were like, I'm still a little fuzzy.
Yes, that's exactly. I was like hungover for like 3 days because I slept an hour.
So the other fun thing about life now is it's become fashionable to be sober, right? It's fashionable to have a sober January. And I'm like, yeah, I got to have a sober 12 months. but people, I think generally people don't give a shit anymore. It used to be like, and my observation, humbly, not to make this about substance issues, my observation honestly is most of the time when I'm not drinking and people find out I have issues with that, it becomes more of a mirror for them because they're like, well, if he had an issue, do I have an issue? I mean, like it's a mirror thing. But look, part of it also is I was probably, and I used to be, Lauren, I used to be like 100 pounds bigger. I was on a collision course with probably
Wait.
dying in.
It's the first picture that comes up when you put in Franz Borghardt and go to images.
And I, it's like wearing glasses. And Kurt, chime in. It's like wearing glasses. You don't realize how bad and how much you feel horrible until you do something about it. You're like, man, I feel so much better than I used to feel, where I would wake up and I'm like, I have no energy. It hurts to move and this, that, and the other. And, the substance abuse and going back to the eating, getting healthy means being healthy and wanting to stay healthy, which is why when I hear Kurt's like a gym rat, I'm like, yeah, it tracks,
Sorry, I
right?
just found you. I literally just, you are.
I'm sexy now. I used to be.
All right.
No, I mean,
let's
you
see if
look
Franz
so much younger. I don't know if you can see my light is.
Yeah.
I'm familiar with that picture.
Sorry. I'm sorry. Now I'm being the asshole here. Like, but.
No.
I actually think I brought it up. You can pin that one on me.
Okay, great. You and Kirk both look like you're 20 years younger than 5 years ago. It's so insane. My gosh. Right? Man.
Kirk, I wanted to ask you, we were gonna hit on this last week, and then we had our little delay, and it would have been the perfect time because the whole the whole Boone thing. But a lot of the questions that everybody wanted to know that nobody talks about is what exactly is involved when people decide to represent themselves. Like, I can't picture, you know what I mean? It's like you wouldn't Google how to do a surgery and then assume that you can do it. I mean, you guys go to law school for,
so
seems like
if
forever.
I cannot speak for Kurt on this one. Everybody in the room wants everybody to be represented because things just flow better.
That's
right?
my first thought. So, like, I imagine right off the bat, the other attorney and the judge knows it's going to be out of joint because you're going to walk into court and try to defend yourself and.
So if you're standby counsel in some jurisdictions, I'm just sitting back and like they look at me and they ask me a question and I'm like, yeah, don't do what you're about to do, please, or you can't do what you're about to do. And then they try to do it anyway, and it's like they get mad at me, and I'm like, dude, I just told you not to do that, and you're doing it. It's very frustrating, but the beauty of our system is if you want to represent yourself, you get to represent yourself. I mean, and you have a dipshit as an attorney, so.
Well, that was the question, Kirk. Why should people not represent themselves?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's ultimately it. I mean, you're not going to do a good job. But I think with Sarah Boone, I do have some concerns / reservations about how she became self-appointed. I mean, I was a public defender for years before I left. The last several years was in the death penalty unit. So all we did was death penalty cases. And, I've had Miss Arias tried to represent herself for a while, but what have you. But, generally people weren't dumb enough to go down that road. But I think what we're really seeing, and I thought it was interesting because in my experience in Maricopa County, if you don't believe in your client's innocence or you don't share a certain belief that they have, that doesn't get you off the case. Every day there'd be a defendant in Maricopa County saying, hey, I want an attorney. They don't believe in my innocence. They're not fighting for me. They're not doing what I want. They don't share the same religious beliefs I have, what have you. Therefore, I want new counsel. And the judge would deny that every time. But it seems like to me that these attorneys basically probably went in and told Ms. Boone, listen, your crime is on tape. You're laughing. You're mocking the victim. You admitted to zipping him up. You're going to be found guilty at trial. If there's a plea, we should take one. And she didn't like what she heard, and she walked out. We heard one time she walked away from her attorney. To me, in my opinion, that's not reason for the attorney to go. Or I don't like client X or Y. That's not a reason for the attorney to go, right? I wouldn't have been trapped with Miss Arias if it wasn't for that case, right? So, you know, you don't get to just say, I don't like this person, bye. And so, but apparently that's what the judges in Florida were doing. Judge Shearer on Court TV, she was on before me, explained kind of the same experience I had. So really, she has been made pro per by the fact that her attorneys withdrew. And that becomes problematic to me because she's still asking for counsel, what have you. So look, she's going to get convicted, and having an attorney at her table is not going to alter that reality. But at the same time, the situation that led to her being pro per and the stumbling that we're seeing right now that any attorney would tell you we're going to see might be very well the reason that the case gets turned over on appeal, because she did not waive her right to counsel just by being a jerk. It doesn't work that way.
Didn't she fire most of them? That's where I guess my confusion lies. Like I thought maybe one or two of them walked out, but I thought the rest, she was like, no, bye. That's where I was like, well, too bad.
I believe some were fired, but I believe several made motions to withdraw. So that's where I think the problematic nature comes.
So the Constitution requires effective assistance, right? Effective assistance doesn't mean you get the Bentley of attorneys, right? You don't get a Josh Shipper just because you have a right to counsel, right? That's right. Shout out to Josh Shipper. The irony is, and people don't believe me when I say this, some of the best attorneys in the country are public defenders. Like, all they do all day long is criminal work. Now, they may be overworked, they may be underpaid, but they're generally the most knowledgeable in the field, and they have an infrastructure generally set up to file the motions to protect your rights, right? What's interesting is a lot of jurisdictions, I'm not speaking about Florida, a lot of jurisdictions, it's entirely based on what's going on in the public defender system in that jurisdiction. For example, if there's a cadre of conflict attorneys, well, maybe a judge might accommodate and say, look, I'm going to give you another attorney. You have this conflict, whether it's artificially made conflict or there's really a conflict. I'm going to give you another one. But at some point, you run out of attorneys, right? And I agree with Kurt 100%, is, look, if she fired a few of them, great. But like, honestly, whether or not I think a client is guilty or not guilty, or did it or didn't do it, is irrelevant to me. I mean, my job is if I can crack into reasonable doubt, I'm going to do that. That being said, I agree. I think she may get another bite at the apple because she's still saying, I want an attorney.
Do you think they're just trying to get her to plea out, though? I thought about that. Maybe the judge is just like, dude, can we just be done here? Just take some, like, I don't know.
I don't think so, because I think it's an easy case to convict. I mean, the prosecutor doesn't even have to do much more than play the tape. They pick the jury. I mean, I think it's a day or two at most. So no, I don't think the prosecutor has much insight.
Wait, you think the trial would be 2 days?
Yeah, I mean, it's on tape. I mean, all they got to do is.
I didn't think about that. That's crazy.
So even if they do bells and whistles, Lauren, and they put on, you know, they're gonna put on the pathologist to talk about cause of death. They're gonna have all the photos. They're gonna do everything a prosecution always does, and that may take a couple of days, right? But the core case itself is that video where he's trapped in a suitcase, and she's freaking filming it.
Well, you know what's even worse about it, if you really get into it, I mean, there's 2 videos, and you've got the first one where, you know, she's laughing, she's slurring her words and whatever. Then you've got the second one, guys, where the suitcase is flipped over. So you know that she was over there messing with him. And then if you look at the autopsy report, which is very disturbing to me, and I had a chief medical examiner out of Texas look at this, because he's got all these bruises and he's got a laceration, you know, to the head, to the eye. He's like, you know, I wouldn't be surprised if Sarah Boone went over there and kicked it like a lot. And this is speculation. This is, you know, guessing.
Well, that's going to be the theory. That's going to be a theory for the prosecution, but they don't even have to throw that theory out.
Yeah.
It's just horrible, though. I guess that's my point, is like, you know, this is a horrible thing here. And because she seems to have so many loose screws, like, to me, I don't want that woman on the street. I want her far away from.
I don't think you're going to have to worry about her ever being quote unquote
Okay,
on the
great.
street.
Okay, just
Unless
making
she lives
sure.
to be
Making sure.
175.
Yeah,
But
right.
but there are, to me, and I don't think that that's a death penalty case, right? That's just
No, I think it's like it's second-degree murder, which I think is like 20 years in Florida minimum, right? Can someone speak to that? Yeah.
I think the defenses for her are more akin to this is murder, but it's a lesser murder, right? Like there may have been some mental health issues, there may have been some impairment. That to me would be a wonderful defense for her and seemingly consistent with her mental health issues. She's going to shoot the moon. She's going to try to go for not guilty, which it just.
Yeah, and now, Kirk, do you think the videotape changes that whole thing? If you were to hear this, like you said, a 2-day trial, I guarantee if there was no tape, it would be 6 months. But like you just said, with 2 days, I agree with you. I think the defense can go in there and say whatever they want. The prosecution can just go hit play and say, this is kind of how it went down. Like we talked about this a little bit with Vinnie Politan 2 weeks ago, with some of the issues with the justice system. Was like your disconnect with Jodi Arias and just all these cases where people are trying to represent themselves. I can't remember. I was going to bring up that guy from last year. Remember the guy that was pounding on the walls?
Daryl Brooks.
Yeah, and they could hear him next door and all that sort of thing. Like, I'm hoping at some point somebody can get a system in place here to say, like, the YSL trial is a perfect example. And Josh had one of the best comments we've heard. He's like, you could like start building a hospital with the money that they're spending on this trial. Somebody at some point has to step into this and say, like, what did we think? YSL's at 400,000 for his defense, and the prosecution's probably doubled that.
So there's going to be subtle things that if you're not an attorney, you're not going to pick up on. But for example, she may not realize that if Kurt was a prosecutor, she may not realize that Kurt cannot lead in his case in chief, right? So she may not know to object to leading questions. If I can lead and I'm allowed to lead because nobody's objecting, my examination is going to go. Yeah, it's going to go much quicker than if I have to ask who, what, where, when, and how questions. Yeah. Right. There are subtle things. She
asked what sustain mean the other day. Sorry. So I don't think she's going to be objecting to anything anytime soon.
So Lauren, do you think, I got to ask this question. Lauren, do you think that she really doesn't know what sustain means? Or do you think that she's faking?
Well, that's interesting because if you look at some of the interviews with police, the things she says, I excel at everything. That's one of her phrases. I am a straight A student. So I would think, I think any Joe Schmo knows what sustain means, but I didn't really think about that. Is she pretending? And wait, I looked it up. The minimum sentence is 16 3/4 years in prison is a minimum for second-degree murder in Florida. So think about that. She could really only serve 16 years. I mean, maximum obviously is life, but.
Well, that's kind of a horrible. How old is she?
43 now, maybe 45, something like that.
I don't mean this ugly. She looks like she has a little bit of mileage on her. So.
I mean,
that was ugly.
Think about prison. You can't wear makeup. You can't I would not be cute in prison. I'm sorry. I would get super gray.
I disagree.
I would just be, I don't know. You can't have eye cream or Botox or blah. Prison would not be for me.
Kirk's not wearing eye cream right now. He looks fantastic.
He's not in prison. So
remember, there are a lot of jailhouse lawyers in prison who write motions, who write documents. I think she's the one writing everything she's writing, including that wonderful advertisement she made.
She is. But she one of her motions I saw was just she copied something out of a law book. It made literally no sense. I'm just like, Kirk, have you seen any of these?
I haven't dissected her motions, no. But that's exactly though what Franz is talking about. There is somebody in their jailhouse lawyer that is dishing out these motions, that has quoted these things. She may be rewriting them, but that's the standard practice in there. So she's not going to the law library. She's going to somebody who claims to have some expertise in the area and is exchanging those motions for candy bars or what have you. So that's really the way that's working. I mean, literacy is the greatest commodity in prison, because then you can get a lot in exchange for that, commissary wise and things like that. So she's really just filing motions that somebody's jailhouse lawyer, like Franz mentioned, is telling her to file.
You would have thought that that lawyer would cover sustained in the first lesson.
Well, now you have me thinking, like, is she, I didn't really think about that. Is she kind of playing dumb? I mean, yeah.
No,
I
I
sense
think
that she is manipulative, but
Yeah.
not to interrupt Kurt, I think there is genuinely a, like, she may not really know what that means. I mean,
yeah, you have to think about it. It is kind of a term of art. She doesn't know anything. She might have some mental health challenges. I believe she does. I mean, so, she might not understand any of this. I mean, we look at her. I mean, however she acts in court aside, whatever ignorance she feigns,
Yeah.
it doesn't really matter as much as her saying what Franz said earlier. I want an attorney, because that is really, when you talk about an appeal, she's on there saying, I want an attorney. That is enough, I think, to get a court of appeals to say, okay, you dismissed all these lawyers and you didn't give her a new one. And all she does is sit there and say, I want an attorney. And that's really all it takes.
a smart judge would try to get her an attorney.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because
This judge is not having it, though. You see, he denies everything. Like,
attorney number 10. This is going to be the next couple of weeks of your life.
But I tell you what, that's an easy case. Look, Arias was like 8 months, 8 months. This is like 2 days. Somebody can go in there and suck it up.
You're right.
I'm not sure if we talked about this because it was a while ago. It was actually almost right a year ago now. When you said that she kind of went off on her own, did you have an opportunity to lay out that that was a mistake, like we were just saying? Because that was our follow-up question was, not taking your attorney's advice when you're still connected to them. Had you had a conversation with her not to do that? Or it was just kind of one day it was like, I want to go up there and that's the way it is?
Oh, you're going to get me in trouble. No, I can't divulge that stuff.
Well, no, around it, like circumvent.
Let Franz take the question.
One might say, hypothetically in that conversation, one might say, hey, I care about you and I want to represent you. And there's a reason the Constitution allows you to have an attorney when you can't afford one. And I'm willing to fight for you. I'm here for you. But at the end of the day, it's sacrosanct. If she says, I want to represent myself, it's one of those there's two decisions that they get to make and nobody gets to do anything about. One is if they want to represent themselves, and two is if they want to testify. Like, if you're representing them and you want to make tactical decisions, the case law seems to indicate, well, as long as you're not admitting guilt against their wishes, you can do whatever you want to do, right? Except if they want to represent themselves or if they want to testify. And I would say, knowing what I know about Kirk, I would say there was a conversation at some point about, hey, I'm willing to try this case for you, and I think you probably need to keep me. She is who she is, right? Well, you don't have to answer that, Kirk.
Let me say this. In the death penalty context, what Franz has said, there's a little different because there's something called mitigation, and you can't deny mitigation, and it becomes a question of, does it come in during the guilt phase or is it limited to just the sentencing phase? So that is something that becomes kind of makes those black and white statements that Franz says kind of gray. I never completely got off the case, as we know, because any chance I would have had, I would have got up and ran away, right? So we all know that. But so there I was. But so and that's an entirely different situation than I think because ultimately I was back on the case. But that's an entirely different situation than what Sarah Boone was with, because you can have somebody take over their own defense, and you're right, Franz is right about they can decide whether to plea, whether to take this, if a plea offer is made, whether to take the stand, and they can represent themselves. And one of the outs, I guess, as an attorney is the one I always took is, listen, you're the one who's going to deal with the consequences of this either way. So if you want to take the plea agreement, you want to risk your life at trial, you want to represent yourself, whatever, it's up to you, and it's not my burden to live with. It's yours. And so the consequences are all the clients.
How long was the penalty phase in that trial?
Very short.
Oh,
2 weeks. Not even 2 weeks, I don't think.
so very important. And I get blasted sometimes on court TV for saying this. In death penalty cases, most of the time, the most important part of the entire case is to keep your client alive.
Yes.
Which means that not that I don't care about your guilt, but the mitigation, the penalty phase mitigation is so much more important. And not doing something to screw up that in your case in chief guilt phase is important. And when you tell a client, hey, look, this is why we have this mitigation expert, which by the way, they're not cheap.
Right.
Mitigation experts are not cheap. They are possibly the most important component of the case.
Who pays for that if you don't have money?
The county.
You do.
In my experience, the county
and sorry,
does.
Not to be dumb. I guess I don't know a death penalty case that I've covered so far. What is the penalty phase?
So
if they go ahead, Kirk.
Okay. So Franz is right. I mean, the ultimate job of a defense attorney in a death penalty case is to save the client's life. That is ethical responsibility number 1 through 10. Okay. And really, when they charge a death penalty case, to kind of expand on what Franz said, guilt is pretty much presumed. I mean, there could be issues or things of that nature, but really what you're really trying to do is build up towards that mitigation phase. And some of that mitigation might come in as a defense to the case in chief. So what happens, Lauren, is when we have a death penalty case, a jury is selected at the beginning of the trial, knowing that it's a death penalty case, and they are screened specifically for a death penalty case. So meaning they are going to have to tell the court that at the end of the trial, assuming that you find client X guilty of, say, for example, killing his children, we just had a case like that, the guy pled out killing his children, could you consider both life and death? If you got to that point, could you give equal consideration to both penalties? And so that becomes a different dynamic of jury selection. It's not just can you be fair and partial, et cetera. And so what that does ultimately is that breeds a jury that is more likely to convict of the underlying crime, but less likely to send someone to death. So to follow up more on your question is, so there's a regular trial where guilt or innocence is determined on whatever counts there are. Obviously, it's first-degree murder in death penalty case. And then directly after that, that same jury sits in judgment in a penalty phase where they listen to things about a client's life that might give them reason. Because what the Supreme Court has basically said is you have to have individualized sentencing practices. So like a law, for example, that says if you kill a cop, you get the death penalty, has been struck down by the Supreme Court because it has to be individualized consideration. So if somebody's up for the death penalty, I mean, I remember the first death penalty case I watched, they had somebody's 2nd or 3rd grade teacher in there talking about intellectual disabilities that weren't recognized at the time, things of that nature, right? Because of the nature of the case, it was gruesome. All death penalty cases are gruesome. But then the jury considers whether or not to give life or death based on that reality.
And
based
that's
on the
after?
crime.
Sorry,
That's
I'm just trying
after.
to understand.
That's
So after they find, let's say they find the defendant guilty, then you go to this penalty phase where you can showcase almost like.
It has to be guilty of first-degree murder. The state can put on aggravation. They have to prove aggravating factors, and the defense proves mitigating factors, and the jury weighs the aggravating factors against the mitigating factors and determines which sentence is appropriate.
And they can vote life. This is the beautiful part about our system. They can vote life. One juror can vote life for any reason they deem appropriate that is a mitigator. So for example, Kurt's client was in the Navy at some point, and one of the jurors is like, I don't want to put somebody to death that served in the Navy.
Okay.
The law is satisfied with that one juror voting for life for that one reason, which is why mitigation experts are so, they overturn every single rock about a human being, and they look for things you wouldn't even think to look for, because you don't know what is going to be the one reason why someone might vote for life.
Okay, so
So,
then let me,
and it can be,
Oh,
I just
I
wanted
was
to
gonna-
ask you guys just one more thing. It's in every state, it's different because, or no, this is universally the same. Okay, so then, and I'm sorry, this sounds probably dumb. I'm like learning so much right now. Who would have thought? So when Scott Peterson's death penalty or death sentence, I'm sorry, was overturned in 2020, the reasoning was something about the jury not being qualified or something to make this decision. That's what I read. And I'm probably saying it incorrectly, but like, why? I guess I don't follow.
I don't remember this Peterson case specifically in terms of, I believe it was juror misconduct or something of that nature.
So maybe, okay. Yeah,
but,
maybe it was
but,
that.
But yes, a juror has, when a jury goes in, it's a death penalty case. Both parties know, and they get to ask those questions about the death penalty and thoroughly investigate that. And to follow up on what Franz said and to explain it a little further, a death penalty attorney, and the attorney is in charge of it, whether they have a, I mean, in Maricopa County, we had people that were salaried mitigation specialists, what have you. We have to investigate their life, the client's life, from conception. And I mean conception because fetal alcohol syndrome, smoking, drug use, in utero drug use, things of that nature, all the way up to the day they're sentenced. Meaning, I might find myself as a death penalty attorney talking to someone's third grade teacher. I might find myself talking to a grandparent. I might find myself because of what mom did or what stepdad did as a child or something like that. So it is a very expensive process. It requires people to, like, again, travel all across the country sometimes to investigate this background, to talk to these people. And that's what's required of a death penalty attorney in order to present this mitigating evidence.
A good prosecutor, and I handled 3 murder cases when I was a prosecutor, a good prosecutor who knows that there are some serious mitigation issues in the case will look at Kurt before going to the grand jury or after and saying, I'm not sure that this is a case that would be appropriate for death penalty. They may not say it this way. And they may say, I need some mitigation that would substantiate me making a decision to take death penalty off the table, because there are certain reasons, Lauren, that if I know certain things, I can't put someone to death, right? It might be an IQ threshold. It might be, if there's a glaring mental health issue, I want to know that, because my view was, I'm going to go to the victim's family and I'm going to say, listen, we can pursue the death penalty. And that is going to be a decades-long process. And there's this big issue here that ultimately, even if I convince a jury to put Mr. Smith to death, this may get overturned by a higher court 20 years from now. Or we can pursue life without parole without those same safety bumpers, those same constitutional safeguards. And if I get a conviction, there won't be the same kind of scrutiny on that conviction. Which do you think would be better for you? And a lot of victims' families, at least in Louisiana, in my jurisdiction, it was like, well, I don't want to be dealing with this shit for the next 20 years. I'm content with him going to jail for the rest of his life. And in Louisiana, life means life.
You know what, though? Like, we had Matthew Mangino on a while ago who actually wrote a book about the death penalty. And I don't remember his numbers, but it was in the 70 or 80% of people on death row die of old age. Like, I think this year, the first one that they put down got on death row in 1993.
That doesn't surprise me at all. I mean, I've heard statistics where the average from date of sentencing to date of execution is like 15 years. And that means
15 years
probably,
minimum. Yeah.
Yeah, that means there's probably a lot more. And what Franz said is accurate. I mean, what's going to happen in a death penalty case, the most my understanding is 50% of those cases, this kind of circles back to what we were talking before about hate on the lawyers. 50% of death penalty cases are overturned due to ineffective assistance of counsel at the sentencing phase. That something didn't happen right, therefore the death penalty cannot be invoked, and they have to be retried as it relates to the sentencing phase, which nobody wants to happen. So, you have that situation where, the Supreme Court is going to look at if I have a client sentenced to death, and I was co-counsel on one, but never when I took command did I ever have a client sentenced to death. And in that regard, though, if I did, people would be looking at what I did, or more appropriately, what I didn't do, for the next 15 to 20 years to determine whether a sentence of death could be imposed upon my client. It's that serious. And they say, hey, you didn't go talk to his third grade teacher who said blank.
You're like, yes, I did.
And I'm not, you laugh, but I'm not joking, because there could be reasons,
I'm blown
right?
away. That's
yeah. And so that is the onerous task. And that's, I did 2 death penalty cases before Jodi Arias to trial. And that doesn't sound like a lot, but in the death penalty world, there were guys who'd gone decades without having to take a single case to trial. And the trial, even a short one, was like 3-4 months. Even a cold case DNA hit was 3-4 months. And that is preceded by years worth of work, trying to get the school records, what have you, right? I mean, I had a client with a bullet lodged in his nose that we knew had brain damage, but we couldn't do an MRI. So we had to hire a speech pathologist to diagnose brain damage. So, I mean, that kind of work. And had he been sentenced to death, if I hadn't have done that sentence would be overturned.
Right.
And from the victim's perspective, not that it should be quick and easy, but from a victim's perspective, you can have the conversation as a prosecutor and say, look, if I try this case as a non-death penalty case, it may be a 2-week-long trial. If we try it as a death penalty case, we may be picking a jury for 1.5 to 2 months, depending on the publicity, depending on what's going on. And some jurisdictions, you have trouble finding death qualified juries. That's a big issue in a lot of places.
And one other thing I had to make sure I got in, because a lot of people were asking about it. It was about the Matthew Perry situation. Now, the big question was, do you think the person who gave him the drugs is guilty of murder? Because
no one's being charged with murder.
No, but I know, but that's what I'm saying is the ultimate thing is, like, whose fault is it that he died? And I think with him in particular, the more and more you hear about the story, it was going to happen eventually. You hear that the between the alcohol abuse, the pills, and everything.
They're going after the personal assistant that was probably the go-between.
Yeah.
To find the drugs,
administering it. He was the
right. And Derek, what I struggle with is this is a guy. This guy. His book is amazing, by the way. If you have not read Matthew Perry's book, it really is a good book. This is a guy that probably found what he was looking for. And I hate to say that, he was struggling with some serious demons. And
for 25 years.
Yeah, I think if it wasn't these guys, it would have been somebody else to find those narcotics for him. And
that was exactly the point I was going to make. I don't think there's any one person particularly guilty in this situation, because if you're doing that much volume and you're buying it from, I'm assuming he's bought it from different people over the years, when your issues are that bad, it's only a matter of time.
Not necessarily ketamine, but ketamine really, he only met these doctors a month prior to his death. He had met Jasveen Sangya, years earlier in rehab. And I think the issue with Jasveen, and she deserves to be behind bars at this point. She sold ketamine to another young man, and in 2019, he passed away. He was 33, and his sister texted her and found a Venmo. And basically, Jasveen, upon hearing that, she kind of Googled, like, what can happen to me if I sold it to this guy? And nothing happened to her. And she continued on to sell it. Yeah. And so she is, and her go-between, by the way, this guy, Eric Fleming, it's even more tragic. Eric Fleming is like a producer, a director in Hollywood who fell into this kind of whole thing here. And that's horrible. But these doctors also are disgusting, because you trust your doctors, and they're it was just gross how they did this. He had no prescription. He had no plan. They were selling him vials of ketamine for $2,000 that you can get on the street for $12 a vial.
Yeah, I
So
remember that he paid $5,500 or something for like a
he
handful
paid
of
like $3,000 for
The
20
dude-
vials.
The dude had millions of dollars
Yeah.
from friends and movies that he blew through because of his addiction.
Yeah.
I mean, and it's hard to imagine that, but it's not hard to imagine that if you're spending $2,000 for a vial of whatever. And look, where I struggle is you've got some assistant working in Hollywood who applies for the gig and is getting like drugs for their actor, boss, not thinking, hey, this could end up in like death.
I agree.
Right. And that's part of I'm not from LA. I don't live out there yet, but that's part of the kind of like the thing out there, right? It's like, if you don't find this for me, I'm going to go hire somebody else that.
Yeah. And I'll just add his autopsy report. I mean, I had a professional look at it, and with all of his issues with what he had going on with an enlarged heart and his BMI, and just, the simple fact that his colon exploded and he just had all this damage. This medical examiner said, I gave him 5 to 10 years to live at most. And his heart issues, based on the autopsy report and what they found, he could have gone into cardiac arrest at any point, whether it was that day or 10 years from now, it was bound to happen. So I think a lot of this might come out during the trials of Jasmine and Dr. Plasencia.
I gotta say though, that Lauren, respectfully, would be irrelevant to the charges if there was a murder charge, because you take the victim as they are, so you can't say, hey.
Well, there's not a murder charge though.
No, there's not. But I mean, that was the question. I mean, could anybody be charged with murder? I think it's possible that the assistant who inject could be charged with a manslaughter, a reckless manslaughter. I don't know if Franz agrees or not, because he is injecting him with a foreign substance. But his health wouldn't play a factor in that.
It wouldn't.
If the charges were aggravated to that point.
Michael Jackson's doctor was charged with murder, was he not?
Yes.
Different situation though.
But
different situation.
It's administering drugs that aren't necessary.
So here's the question.
Yeah.
Here's the question. Is this the test? If you're doing this prosecution to set policy,
it is. It will
to stop this from happening again.
Mm-hmm.
Is this the test pilot case to do that? I don't think it is. And I agree with Kurt that no, those things are not going to come in unless they argue for nullification. Mm-hmm. If they can even get it in, because I don't know that it comes in. Like all his health issues, I don't know that all comes in unless you make an argument for intervening causation that look, whether I gave him these drugs or not, he was a walking time bomb. I just don't think it ever comes in.
No, you're probably right. I think it's just, I guess, so you've got Jasmine and Dr. Plasencia who are pleading not guilty. You've got the other three, the assistant, the other Dr. Chavez, and you've got Eric Fleming, who all took a plea and whatever that is, I don't know if that's going to be, I feel like it's going to be jail time probably for Iwamasa, but I don't know. I feel like, they're making an example out of these people, and Keith Morrison most likely had something to do with that. Cause you hear all these people being like, it's really sad and it's good they're doing this, but like, what about every single regular person that overdoses? It's not a Hollywood celebrity.
But the difference is, Lauren, it's not traceable. I mean, you buy drugs on the street corner for 20, 40 bucks. That's not traceable. When you're talking about the ketamine queen and some of these doctors, they're dealing whatever electronic funds app, that's very traceable. That's very easy for the feds to follow up on. And I'm going to guess somebody doesn't get the nickname ketamine queen starting with Matthew Perry, right?
So taking cash either,
yeah, you're not. Well, and so if you're cash apping money around and you're using your MD as really a storefront to be a drug dealer, there could be many rich executive, maybe not famous people that are under this same addiction. It could be different substances, could be Oxycontin, could be lots of different things. So But I think this is going to be the tip of the iceberg. So whether this will be a test case for murder, I don't know, because the assistant's the only one. But certainly, I think it's going to open up doors, and I wouldn't be surprised if the ketamine queen and some other people were charged that this is more of an in-depth operation than it appears right now, just because of the massive quantity and the idea that he probably wasn't the only person they were supplying.
Yeah, every time I hear Paper Trail, I always think of the Charlie Sheen when all of his shit hit the fan. You remember they were finding prostitutes that he had written checks to for like 30, 40,000 drug
And he has
dealers,
a connection to
drug
this.
dealers that he had written checks to, and it was unbelievable. And he was just like, yeah, I did it, whatever.
So traditionally, we've always had laws that if you deal drugs and it results in an overdose, we have these felony murder doctrines, and that's nothing new, right? What a lot of states are spending a lot of time fighting right now are instead you're selling drugs that are marketed as one thing but have fentanyl in them. And as a result of your overdose, because it was laced with something else, a lot of states are designing new laws that say, well, no, we're going to make that a separate crime. This has always been, this is nothing new, right? It's just the way it's packaged, because it's Matthew Perry, because it's this doctor, because we have this character, the ketamine queen, which that's going to be a very hard thing.
She's beautiful to look at. You're kind of like, what? This is crazy. This is defying everything I thought about a drug dealer. I'm kidding, obviously, but right? You think of a big, whatever. You get me? I don't know. I'm not living in the 90s, but it
looks like she's been raised from the dead.
Like Nancy said on the show the other day, she's got like a Birkin bag. If you look at her Instagram, she's like humping stripper poles with like money, and like it's weird. It's just bizarre. You're like, what are you glorifying here? It makes you kind of feel icky inside, Oh,
but I had so much more I wanted to get to, the prenuptial agreement stuff and all that, but it does seem like we're running a little bit long. So for another spoonful of Franz Borghardt, check him out on Twitter at Borghardt Law, on Instagram at Franz Borghardt, and for legal stuff at www.borghardtlawfirm.com. For more Kirk Nurmi, go buy his books, even the Jodi Arias one, at Indigo or at Amazon.com. Check him out on Twitter at Nurmi Unchained, and on Facebook at Kirk Nurmi. That's where you can find all of his amazing stuff, where you can reach out to me. For more Lauren Conlin, head over to www.popcrime.tv. Follow her on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram at Lauren Conlin and at Conlin Lauren. Subscribe to her YouTube channel. Check her out. Check out her incredible podcast, The Outlier, wherever you get your fix. And everybody, thank you so much. That was awesome.
yay!
Thank you. And where do I go, Derek, if I want like a whole bowl full of Franz? I just don't want a tablespoon or a spoonful. What if I want a whole like bowl full of Franz?
Throw him under the bus on Twitter.
DirtCon. You got to go to DirtCon.
I'm actually the hotel I'm staying at on my last day is right on the Arizona border. I was gonna get a picture of me with a sign out there that says like Kirk Nurmi or bust.
Are you staying at Laughlin with the elderly?
I don't remember the name of it. I let my wife book.
We're not going to say out loud where we're staying for DirtCon.
Okay, well, hold on a second. Let me stop it.